So let's talk about 40k dice rolling, superstitions, and perhaps borderline cheating. I'll be interested to hear your guys' take on this situation. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about an interesting little dice scenario that I have seen come up a few times in game before. Perhaps a fairly popular but harmless superstition, though as was mentioned in an interesting YouTube comment I read recently, it might genuinely raise the average dice roll that you get, even if probably not by very much. As we all know, Warhammer 40k is a dice game, and in any battle you're going to wind up throwing bucket loads of d6s as the game unfolds, and your warriors hit and wound, or miss and fail their saves. The d6 dice roll is the randomizer of the game. Since things like scatter dice went the way of the dodo, basically every single thing that's left down to chance is determined by a d6 throw, and generally as you command your forces across the battlefield, you want to be in a position where those d6 throws are going to be a bit more weighted in your favour, such as having your units in combat with things that they're good against, or bringing overwhelming force to bear on one portion of the battlefield, so that even if your opponent does roll well with their saves or something, it's still probably not going to save the unit in question. It does mean that there's a fair bit riding on the humble d6. If you're going to have a fair game of 40k, you need to make sure that those d6s aren't being manipulated or being stacked in someone's favour in any way, as sometimes even small amounts of good luck could be pretty game changing if, say, they do make the difference between a unit living or dying. Also, with so much riding on good or bad luck, and in a very close game sometimes it can come down to individual dice rolls, I think there is a tendency for people to get a bit superstitious about their dice, whether it's beseeching the dice gods for good luck, having certain special or lucky dice for big rolls, or not being a fan of other people touching or handling your dice for some sort of fear like the luck goes out of them or something. I can't say I'm in any way superstitious about dice rolls myself, but it certainly doesn't seem to be an uncommon thing throughout the gaming community. In general, being superstitious is pretty harmless, but I think that just about no one would argue that you really want to be gaining advantages on any given d6 roll. In general, you want the actual game and the challenge to be about how you command your little model soldiers across the tabletop, rather than whether or not you can do any tricks with dice to manipulate probability and get unfair advantages in game. Just about the cardinal sin with this would be having dice that are either weighted or have the wrong number visible on them. Certainly not common in 40k, but every so often you do hear of someone being caught with them. Obviously about the clearest form of cheating that you can get, and likely to get you kicked out of any store or tournament or anything that you're playing in. Feels a bit of a sad case of affairs really, someone clearly investing in going quite long lengths to win a game of model soldiers. Perhaps more commonly though, there are other ways that people might manipulate dice in game. Say for example, if you roll a dice and it's slightly cocked, do you re-roll the dice or do you not? Some people basically re-roll everything that isn't flat on the table. Some people will generally only re-roll things where the number that is on top isn't obvious, and some more unscrupulous people will just re-roll the cocked dice when it suits them, and not when it doesn't. Another way some people gain advantages is maybe not declaring the intent before an important roll until you've actually seen the result. Say for example, you had a tank with a las cannon and a storm bolter on it. If you tried to cheat to gain an advantage, you could just roll 2 dice. If it's bad, say it was the storm bolter, and if it's okay, you could say it was the las cannon. Again, pretty clear cheating there, but perhaps not that easy to spot or call people out on it. Recently though, I had something that was quite clearly and concisely brought up to me that I feel maybe blurs the line a little bit between superstition and manipulating dice. It is something that seems at least fairly common as well, as I have seen quite a few people do it anecdotally, though I certainly don't expect any sort of ill will was intended. Basically the idea is this, that if you have a dice that keeps on rolling ones, that dice is an unlucky dice, and might often get sent to a dice jail to think about all the bad deeds that it's done, or just discarded outright in extreme circumstances. You can certainly see why it might work from a superstitious point of view. Yes, that dice is being particularly unlucky today, but I guess at least theoretically it could give you a real advantage due to biasing the dice that you've got. I quite enjoyed one comment from that shooting tactics video that I made the other day, the one where tongue-in-cheek said to just roll 6s, and just highlighted this as a way that might genuinely help with that. Basically their point was that 100% fair dice just don't really exist. The vast majority of dice out there are weighted evenly to the extent where the vast majority of people wouldn't notice, and might well be so good that you need tens of thousands of rolls to reliably prove any real difference. At least logically though, because we live in a real world, they're not going to be 100% weighted throughout the entire thing. Some sides are going to be slightly more likely to turn up than others. It'll depend on how they're manufactured as to which sides they land on slightly more commonly, and how bad the difference is. It's the reason that in casinos, for example, they have their own special dice, specifically designed to be as even as they can reliably do realistically. I guess in theory at least, if you had a whole set of dice that had different biases, where some of them might be very slightly more likely to roll sixes, some of them might be very slightly more likely to roll ones. If you do notice any dice that have been behaving particularly badly and rolling very poorly several times in the game, again, at least theoretically, if you get rid of that dice, you're a bit more likely to have discarded a biased dice, one that maybe fractionally has a bit more chance of rolling a 1. It's basically applying selection bias to your dice pool, I suppose. And again, at least in theory, might mean that you're keeping any dice with tiny biases towards rolling higher and discarding some more dice that have tiny biases towards rolling lower. In reality, I honestly suspect that this is such a small difference that even if you did this very consistently over a long period of time, you probably really wouldn't notice. Just through law of averages, you're going to have some dice that are going to roll badly multiple times in a row and then be sent to dice jail or discarded through no real fault of their own. I also suspect that the majority of dice, the actual real difference between them is going to be in tiny percentage points, things that really aren't going to necessarily add up all that much over the course of a game. Though I must admit, I don't really know the ins and outs of this. It might be that that's a little bit more prevalent if you're using some dice with fancy aesthetic facings. In 40k, it's often quite common for the 6 to be changed, say for a faction's icon or some logo or something. Games Workshop and a bunch of third parties make their own fun dice. I haven't heard any ones that have been particularly controversial from Games Workshop. If there are any that are known to be bad, it'd be kind of interesting. Let us know down in the comments. It could be fun for a follow-up video. In any case though, I'd be really quite interested to hear your guys' takes on this. Is this just a bit of harmless dice superstition that really isn't going to have any meaningful impact on games whatsoever? Or do you see any attempt to modify your average dice throw via selection bias as basically being cheating in 40k and something that's best avoided for the purposes of a fair game? I generally feel that there's at least going to be some sort of divide between people between this. In general, I really don't like the idea of anything that's got the potential to alter the randomness of a d6 throw. But on the other hand, it does sound that even if that was the case with this, the effects will be so minor that it's unlikely to have any serious impact on the game, even if done in excess. In any case, just found that interesting and wanted to share. If you'd like to see more like this, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k related videos coming. I do tend to post most days. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description. The channel's Patreon is what allows me to keep on making videos like this quite so regularly, and if you are enjoying quite a bit, any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an absolutely enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.